Hey everybody, Ian and Todd here.
Welcome to the Fine Food and Healthy Living Asia podcast.
If this is your first time listening, then thanks for coming. The Fine Food and Healthy Living Asia podcast is produced every week for your enjoyment, and show notes are found on our Facebook page.
Come back often and feel free to add the podcast to your favorite RSS feed or iTunes. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram or on my blog, toddinasia.com. That's Todd with 2 D's in Asia.com.
All links are in the show notes. Now, let's get started.
Welcome to the Fine Food and Healthy Living Asia podcast with my co-host Ian Nenke. Ian, how are you today?
I'm good, thanks, Todd. Sorry, listeners, for the bit of the break. One of the reasons for that was because my co-host Todd was actually on a trip to the US. Todd, what was the trip all about? Why did you go to the US?
As you know, I'm involved with a group called Pachamama Alliance. They had their global gathering.
So the Pachamama Alliance, what's it all about? Tell us all about it and what they do.
Yeah, sure. The Pachamama Alliance is an organization started by Lynn Twist, Bill Twist, and John Perkins. And its mission is to create an environmentally sustainable, socially just, spiritually fulfilling human presence on planet Earth. They have a program called Awakening the Dreamer Symposium, which I know you've participated in.
Yeah, I loved it.
They also have something called the Game Changer Intensive, which is an 8-week completion of the Awakening the Dreamer. So if you get kind of turned on by Awakening the Dreamer and you say, well, I want to do more, you can take the Game Changer Intensive. And that's a little more intense commitment of kind of figuring out how you relate to all the issues going on in the world today and maybe creating some purpose for yourself or being able to express a purpose that you already feel that you have. They just introduced something called Drawdown. Drawdown is based on a book by Paul Hawken, which is the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming. And it's a group of scientists got together and did some intensive research over a couple of years and came up with 100 most impactful solutions to not just slow down or stop global warming, but actually to reverse it.
It's a really good book. It's even a New York Times bestseller. How long was the conference for?
Yeah, it went from Friday through Monday. Very intense agenda. There wasn't really a moment of not having some amazing experience happening, either amazing speaker or just there was a lot of facilitated experiential practices as well. You know, one of the things that impacted me greatly was the assignment was go out in nature, and we were in a beautiful setting in the hills of Petaluma at the ION Center, which is the Institute of Noetic Science in Petaluma. And, you know, it's the rolling hills, and there were deer and sheep, and
wow,
the weather was phenomenal. So
sounds very picturesque.
Very picturesque, very bucolic, and just a beautiful setting. So the assignment was go out in nature and just see what nature tells you. See if you can listen or feel or see or, you know, kind of just let your spirit guide you.
Yeah.
I went out and found a rock to sit on. Then a deer came very close to me and just kind of trotted through the tall grass there.
Wow.
I heard this message speak to me, and it spoke to my heart. It really didn't come in through my brain as much as just spoke to my heart. And it was nature telling me that she grew me. And just like the plants and the trees, you know, we humans and we animals, we grew from the planet Earth. You know, it took some sun and some water and air and all of that. We were turned into these amazing, and I got the image of being a walking plant.
Often, well, I mean, that's an amazing insight, because when you think about it, we are a part of the earth, but in today's society, we often separate ourselves from nature, and we rely too much on our technology and, you know, our iPhones and all this other stuff. We don't really take the chance to go out into nature and even see some of the changes that are occurring in nature through global warming.
Exactly. And man, that's so true, Ian. The separation from nature and from each other We were so brought up in our culture, I know your culture in Australia and mine too in America. It's the individual, it's the success at all costs almost. And we're expected to survive as individuals and go out and, make it on our own kind of thing. And if you don't, you're a failure. And if you do, you're a success. But it's all so separate, and it's also individual. And it's almost like people, you just look at what happened just now to Anthony Bourdain. And there's another example of someone who has everything that society says they should have: the fame, the money, the place to express their opinions. And yet there's something off. And what I think that off is exactly what you're saying. It's the individual separation from nature and each other.
And often that's why it's so hard for people to either believe in global warming, because you get all these alternative facts, as they say.
Right.
And especially nature, the environment turns very slowly. I know that, having been a farmer, you don't see the changes right away. But over 20 years of farming, I would see it partly through our records, because our rainfall would deplete, but also when I used to do a lot of traveling as well. So there's now, because our climate is changing even by a few degrees, you're finding that there's a lot of fauna and flora that are now changing their geographic locations according to the temperature. And it's also happening, I read somewhere, it was a couple of years ago, I think it was the West Australian newspaper, where they're now finding that the corals are actually coming down from the top end of Western Australia because it's getting so hot and you get coral bleaching. And the temperature of the water down the southern end is actually warming up, so it's becoming easier for corals to grow in that ecosystem. They're actually travelling.
Wow.
But anyway,
fascinating.
That's different again.
Yeah.
Now, getting back to the conference.
Yeah.
What people were there at the conference?
Well, it was just jam-packed. I think Maisa, who organized a lot of it, and Tracy Apple, and also Lynn Twist herself, they basically sent out an invitation to everyone they could think of that they would like to have as a speaker or
a guest
or a guest. Yeah. And they said, like, everybody said yes. And that's a testament to Lynn and Bill and the organization that, people such as Paul Hawken and John Perkins and Charles Eisenstein and Brian Swim and Reverend Deborah Johnson, who's a powerful social justice minister in the United States, all said yes. So they really packed it in. So it started off really with Lynn Twist and Bill Twist, who are the founders of Pachamama, and John Perkins. They led off an introduction, and I think what we'll do here is we'll sneak in a clip of Lynn Twist talking about her own personal journey and why she started the Alliance. And it's really a fascinating story. So we'll just play that clip right here.
Sounds great.
Would you share with us the story of how you began the Pachamama Alliance?
Yes, I'd be happy to do that. So I was an executive, one of the leaders of the Hunger Project, as I mentioned before, and the Hunger Project became and has now become a very large international global movement. I was one of the first people at the very heart of it in the beginning, and it began in 1977, and then by 1997, 20 years later, it had grown to a worldwide project, and I was responsible for managing operations in 47 countries, and 47 countries included countries like Mozambique, Angola, Senegal, Ghana, Bangladesh, India, some major countries. So I was a very, very busy, committed woman, and I still had 3 kids and a wonderful husband, and I was traveling a lot and trying to manage my family, and I was definitely full out, you could say. And at that time, I did a favor for a friend who had been a large donor to the Hunger Project, and went to Guatemala to train his development director for his project, where he was working in Central America. And on that trip, I co-led it with a man named John Perkins, who was very familiar with the Amazon. And I hadn't gone to the Amazon. I hadn't been in South America. I wasn't concerned about that part of the world. I was very oriented towards Africa and Asia. Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, and then all over sub-Saharan Africa, where hunger and poverty was just raging. And on this trip to Central America, to Guatemala, we had the opportunity to see a shaman. And during the shamanic ceremony, which was my very first ever shamanic ceremony, I got a very, very clear vision. And it was incredibly real, sitting in a circle around a fire, and then we laid down with our feet towards the fire, and the shaman was drumming and chanting, and it was in the middle of the night, and he told us to journey, and I began to close my eyes and listen to the drum and the sound of his voice and the crackling of the fire, and this is the middle of the night, if you can picture that. And then suddenly I began to feel my arms turn into huge, gigantic wings. First, my right arm became a giant wing, and then my left arm became a giant wing, and then I felt a beak grow in my face, and then I experienced myself flying and soaring over a vast, unending forest of green. And I looked down, was flying in slow motion with these huge wings, and I was a gigantic bird with a huge wingspan. And I looked down, and I could see all the way through the top of the trees or the canopy towards the forest floor. And then at a certain point, these disembodied faces of men with orange geometric face paint on their faces and yellow, red, and black feather crowns on their heads started floating up from the forest floor through those trees up towards this bird, which was me. And these disembodied faces of men were calling to me in a strange language that I didn't understand, a kind of a plaintive call to the bird. And then they would float back down into the forest and disappear, and the bird, I'm the bird, flying slowly over this vast forest, and then they'd float up to this bird again and call to the bird, and then they'd disappear into the forest. And it was really, really hypnotic and mesmerizing and awesome. And it was very, very real. And I was this bird. It wasn't like I imagined this. I was this bird. And then at a certain point, I heard a loud drum beat. And I realized I was a human being, and I felt my arms. They were arms. I felt my face. I had a nose and a mouth. I was just a human being again, and I sat up. I looked across the fire, and the fire had gone down to embers, and we were all sitting in a circle, and I saw the shaman across the circle from me and the other people in the circle, and everybody had a very, very powerful, you could tell, strange journey of some kind. And as one by one we shared our journey, I shared mine with the shaman, and he gave me a strange, weird look, and then I went around the circle to my friend John Perkins, who had been in the Ecuadorian Amazon just before he came to this Guatemalan trip, and he had had a vision very similar to mine. And so the shaman completed the ritual, dismissed all the other people, and John Perkins and the shaman and I sat together, and John and the shaman seemed to know that what I experienced was a call from some very remote tribe in the Amazon. And the shaman said this was not a normal vision, this was a communication, a call. And John said he recognized the facial paintings and the facial markings, and the headdress to be the Shuar or Achuar people who were calling for contact from the Amazon rainforest. And I thought, this is the weirdest thing I've ever heard in my life. It's kind of romantic, but I'm ending world hunger. I don't have time for this. So I dismissed it, and I went on from from Guatemala to where I was then, to Ghana, to a meeting I had to go to in West Africa, in a place called Accra, which is the capital of Ghana. And I was sitting at a table in a hotel in Accra, Ghana, in West Africa. This is like a week later, with Ghanaian people, 4 men and 3 women and myself at a table in a kind of nice hotel in the capital of Ghana. And we're having this conversation. I'm the only white person. Everybody else is Ghanaian. They have very, very dark, beautiful, blue-black skin, Ghanaian people. And the conversation was taking place. I wasn't leading the meeting. I was part of a board meeting. And then at a certain point, the men sitting around the table had orange geometric face paint in a pattern started appearing on their faces, just like I'd seen in my vision. And everybody kept talking as if this was not taking place. And I was completely and totally shocked. And I thought, oh, I'm hallucinating. And I just left the room and went to the ladies' room, gathered myself together, and went back. And they're still talking in the meeting, and everybody looks normal. And then it happens again. And I burst into tears. And everybody stared at me, well, what's wrong? And I said, well, I think I'm very, very sick. I need to go back to the United States. So I went to my room, packed my bag. I was totally freaked out, as you can imagine. I went straight to the airport. This is in 1990. Where was it? Wasn't this 1995? I went straight to the airport. There was no cell phones, no email then. And I just got on the first plane to Europe or the U.S. And the plane was to Frankfurt. And all the way on the plane from Accra, Ghana to Frankfurt, I saw these faces, whether my eyes were open or shut. The faces with the orange geometric face paint and the yellow, red, and black feather crowns on their heads. And then from Frankfurt to New York, from New York to San Francisco, where I live, whether I was awake or asleep, I saw the faces. And when I got home, I was terrified that I'd lost my mind. I told my husband, but not like I'm telling you, because I was afraid I was completely nuts, and I minimized it. But it didn't go away. It came in dreams, daydreams, night dreams, and eventually my friend John Perkins, who was with me in Guatemala, who told me that those faces were the Achuar people of Ecuador, he came back. He was not available when I came back from Africa. He was back in the rainforest, and I couldn't reach him. No cell phones, no email at that time. So I faxed him, which is what we did in those days, and I voicemailed him to death on his home phone. And then when he came back, he called me, and I told him, and he said, well, I've been in the rainforest. They're calling for us. They want us to come, and they want to have an encounter with people from the outside world, and we must put together a group of 12 people and go to the rainforest and meet with the Achuar leaders. They're ready for contact. They've seen in their dreams and visions, even though they've been isolated for thousands of years, that it's time for contact, and the contact is inevitable, so they want to initiate it before it comes to them in ways they can't control. And they've called for contact, and they're calling you and me, and they've asked us to bring 12 people with us, or 10 people with us, for the first encounter. And it was just too strange, but eventually I had to surrender to that. I took a leave from the Hunger Project, and John and I organized our first trip to Achuar territory, deep in the remotest region of the Amazon of Ecuador, and my husband Bill came too. And we had an encounter with the Achuar people. We flew into a roadless territory deep into the Amazon and met with the Achuar leaders, who had orange geometric face paint and yellow, red, black feather crowns on their heads. They were the people that I had seen in my dreams, and that was the beginning of what's now called the Pachamama Alliance. And out of that encounter, the Pachamama Alliance was born, and that's now one of the most important things I do with my time in my life, is work with the Achuar, the Shuar, the Shiwiar, the Kofan, the Kogi, the Kayapo, the Uwa, the Kero, the Zapro, all of the indigenous peoples of the Amazon in Ecuador, Bolivia, Peru, Colombia, and Brazil, to preserve the Amazon rainforest, not just for themselves, but for the future of life. And that was the beginning of the Pachamama Alliance. The overarching goal now that we really have learned from indigenous people who see that we in the modern world are living in a kind of trance. They call it a dream that is becoming a nightmare for ourselves and all forms of life. A dream of wanting more of everything, of wanting more money, more time, more houses, more cars, more companies, more freeways, more everything. It's just non-viable. And so they have recommended that we generate a new dream, a dream that is sustainable, a dream that is socially just, a dream that is spiritually fulfilling. And so we actually work to help people transform the dream of the modern world to one that is a dream of environmental sustainability, social justice, and spiritual fulfillment. We call that the new dream.
And thank you to Tara Warner, TeraWarner, at tarawarner.com/Wish Radio, for letting us use a clip from her wonderful podcast that has Lynn Twist and many other great interviews on it.
Fantastic story, really fascinating, particularly where it came from in their visit to South America.
What strikes me is really not so much that we're some great hope for the rainforest, although that, of course, is super important, but the Achuar people and the indigenous people of the Amazon rainforest see that we need their help too. And we're caught in a dream, the belief that we can have unlimited growth, which is baked into our economy. I mean, look at how economy is measured. Look at how the success of the country is measured. GDP growth year over year, growth in the economy, growth in the stock market. It's all grow, grow, grow. You look at any metric for success in our culture, and it's all about growth.
Yeah.
But the earth doesn't grow, The earth is a finite system. Yes, it grows more food and more trees and more plants, but when you take away the land and the trees and the plants and consume it all, it reaches a point, and it's already reached a point, that it can't replenish at the same rate that we're taking from it.
That was, like I said, it was fascinating to hear from Lynn. What was next on the agenda there, Todd? What was?
Well, on Saturday, we got to see Paul Hawken led off the event. Paul spent a good deal of time explaining his book, Drawdown.
Yeah, so Paul Hawken, you mentioned to me before, he was more the editor of the book, is that correct? And
Yeah. Paul edited this, and it's compiled by a group of scientists, and all of the work in it is peer-reviewed scientific information, and it basically outlines 100 different ways that we can reverse global warming. And as he explains in this video, it's a rather striking difference between what a lot of scientists are saying or have been saying, where it's doom and gloom. It's let's mitigate, let's control, let's try to make it as unpainful as possible. Let's try to reduce deaths from the billions, make it only millions. There's all different degrees of climate change horror stories, and
right.
A lot of people are saying we've already passed the point of no return. And what he's saying is, no, we haven't. And not just saving the world, but actually creating a world that's a world that we would actually want to live in. So here's Paul Hawken, and he's going to kind of we'll let him speak for himself.
Terrific.
And it was really important for us to present something in the book that passed the muster of the scientific community, but was completely accessible to the rest of the world. And for example, when you see a thing that says, 2.6 petagram CO2e, you go, really? And that's how science talks about climate, and they do. It's shorthand, and it goes right over it. No one reads that stuff. And so we try to create something. Drawdown's being taught in 4th grade now, by the way. And so we try to create something that was accessible, where you wanted to open the book. And there's nothing about shame, fear, blame, demonization, or otherness. And we go back to thinking about fighting climate change. What is that mindset? That mindset is that the climate is other. It's separated. And that sense of separation is, again, the core problem. That we're separate from life, that we're separate from this place we live. And that the climate is other, so we're going to fix it, in fact. But otherness is the disease of the 21st century. I mean, that's Islamophobia, right? That's the Me Too movement is about treating women as other.
That was a great clip that you put on there, Todd. Obviously, it wasn't the whole video. You'll be able to put that on our website, won't you? Or put links to it?
Yeah, I'll put a link to the entire video on our website and in our show notes for all the podcast outlets.
And I highly recommend people watching it. It's really great. So going on from there,
really kind of a controversial moment came in the, maybe controversy is a bit strong, but sort of I would say, cognitive dissonance a lot of us, myself included, experienced when Charles Eisenstein spoke. Charles is a visionary speaker, author, lecturer who wrote a book called The More Beautiful World Our Hearts Know Is Possible. And he also wrote Sacred Economics, and he's coming out with a new book called Climate, A New Story. And he presented a different take on climate change and global warming. And what he said was, if we do actually accomplish these scientific reductions in emissions, bringing back of emissions back into the ground and into the earth and using all these scientific methods, his question was, is that really going to make the difference that we're trying to make? If we're still separate as individuals, if we're still separated from nature, if we're still acting as if that person over there is wrong and I am right, and my opinion counts and yours is from an idiot, are we going to be in a better place? And almost like putting the cart before the horse to try to solve all these things scientifically, when it was really reductionist thinking and linear thinking that brought us all these problems in the first place. You know, we solve one problem and that just creates 5 more problems.
Yeah.
An example he used was, well, you know what? I think we'll let his video speak for itself.
I don't really have any especially impressive practices. I think it's other people's practices that have created the rising of consciousness that allows me to see and feel these things. But I will say one practice that is the key to everything on this planet right now. It's the practice of asking, what is it like to be you? Whether you're talking about racial healing or ecological healing, what is it like to be you is a revolutionary question, because it's the opposite of find an enemy and destroy the enemy. The basic template of problem solving today in the world is find the enemy and destroy the enemy. Problem, crime, reason, criminals. Solution, lock up the criminals. Problem, terrorism. Reason, terrorists. Solution, kill the terrorists. Problem, you're sick. Reason, germ. Solution, kill the germ. Problem, low crop yields. Reason, weeds. Solution, kill the weeds. Find something to kill. Problem, climate change. Reason, carbon. Solution, suppress the carbon. Same template. So when we ask, well, why is someone a criminal? Why is someone an immigrant? What are the conditions that breed crime? Then the solution of kill something no longer makes sense. What are the conditions that breed weeds? What are the conditions that generate carbon emissions? A deeper level of engagement opens up that is uncomfortable because, one, we don't know what to do anymore. Like, we know how to kill something. We know how to control. We don't know what to do now. That's one reason it's uncomfortable. The second reason is that it's no longer an enemy and an other. It involves yourself. And maybe I'll end with that. A call for embracing the not knowing. We don't know what to do. Let's admit it. We don't know what to do. That's a lot better than thinking we know what to do and doing it and making things worse. And this is the invitation of climate change. It is to relate to the earth as sacred, every piece of it. And if we don't get that message, then the crisis, even if we cut emissions to zero, the crisis will continue. Now, this is, and the reason I'm saying this to you here is because I think that because of the origins of the Pachamama Alliance, in experiences that are not scientifically explainable, I feel that there might be openness to this transition here. If this change in viewpoint is going to be embraced anywhere, it's got to be in this organization. A much deeper and more radical change.
So this sort of cognitive dissonance I'm talking about came from after watching Charles talk. You know, a lot of us, and I was left with, well, you got Paul Hawken presenting this brilliant scientific, peer-reviewed, validated information on the actual possibility of turning around global warming.
Yes.
And I should mention that all of his solutions are not completely scientific. Number 6 is educating girls. He says education lays a foundation for vibrant lives for girls and women, their families and their communities. It also avoids emissions by curbing population growth. So you put those two things together, educating girls and family planning, number 6 and 7, that becomes the actual number one thing that can be done to reverse global warming on this planet.
Sure.
And you know, that's not exactly a scientifically reductionist technique.
No, it's just a simple matter of education.
Yeah. But nevertheless, I was kind of thinking like, well, you know, I was all jacked up and primed and excited to like, I'm going to go out and like lead drawdown seminars and get people going on these drawdown solutions. And then Charles said, well, hold on a second. If you're going to be doing it from the place of like, we're right and they're wrong, and we have to change the Trump voters' minds because they effed everything up and it's getting worse, that's going to just lead down the road, and we're going to be maybe even worse off than we are now.
I want to play another clip from Charles. This is him talking about his new book, Climate, A New Story. And then we'll talk a little bit more about the case of cognitive dissonance at the Pachamama Alliance Global Gathering.
Yeah, new book coming out in September. It's called Climate, A New Story. And the purpose of the title, partly is because it is about climate, and most people don't read anything that has climate in the title. So I thought, okay, because I already know what it's going to say, and I feel helpless to do anything about it, and you know, it's just too depressing, et cetera, et cetera. So that's why I also put a new story in there, but also because it's accurate to the content, because it says that, or one thing it says is that the basic narrative that we have around climate change is itself part of the problem. That climate change is a lot bigger than we think it is, that we have put way too much emphasis on fossil fuels and emissions, and not nearly enough emphasis on ecosystems, biodiversity, water, soil, forests, wetlands, and so forth. And the reason for that, the reason we need to put more emphasis on that, is that this planet is alive, not just a complicated machine whose inputs we can monkey with to create a better result, but that it's a living being, and that through what is called development, we are destroying the organs and the tissues of this living being. That's what the forests are, that's what the coral reefs are, that's what the wetlands are, the mangroves, the grasslands. These are organs of a living being, and we degrade those, and then the body of this being becomes less capable of dealing with challenges. One of those challenges could be rising levels of atmospheric gases, but it could be other challenges too. And if we keep, so basically my thesis is, and you know, I have a lot of, I cite various science to substantiate it, but my thesis is basically that even if we cut emissions to zero overnight, if we continue to degrade the biosphere, the planet will still die a death of 1 million cuts. And that we might not even face global warming. We could face global cooling. We could face climate derangement, where we have these gyrations and fluctuations of like if your body were unable to maintain its constant temperature anymore, unable to maintain homeostasis because of one organ after another is getting degraded. Like, that's the crisis that we face. So basically then we need to shift toward earth care, toward regeneration, toward conservation, toward healing what has been damaged over hundreds and hundreds of years. Like in New Zealand, most of the rivers are so poisoned you can't even wade in them, like much less swim or drink from them. And that's not because of climate change. That's because of, you know, agricultural runoff and toxic pollution and mining and things like that. And that kind of seems like, in the dominant narrative, that's not an existential threat to the planet. It's like that kind of comes second. First thing is carbon. And then we can, deal with the toxic waste and stuff like that, and the plastics and things like that. And I think that mentality is mistaken. I think that it really is the opposite. That we cannot have a healthy planet without healthy rivers. So that brings the focus of environmental urgency to a more local level, which also is more tangible, doesn't require trust in the institutions of science that, whose computer models tell us that in 50 years sea levels are going to rise by whatever. But like we can see the damage right in front of our face here and now, and we can act on it here and now. And that doesn't mean that we can continue business as usual and pick up the litter. No, this requires a fundamental change to our relationship to this material world. A change toward every single decision takes into account more than just ourselves.
The next day, a lot of us shared about that same kind of dissonance going on in our minds. Like, well, what do we do first, and what do we do next? And I think the consensus at the gathering, and what I came to was, well, we can do all of it at the same time. But what Charles, I think, really reminded us of is where we're coming from is really, really important. So one of the things I came out of the conference with is, I'm just going to give up being right. I'm just going to say, I'm just done with being right. And I've been trying to practice that ever since. It doesn't always work because I have a strong need to be right. I have a need to win. I have a need to be right.
Oh, come on, Todd. You're not that opinionated, are you?
Yeah. I need to have my opinion matter and be listened to. And I think I'm just going to as I sat out in nature and listened to nature, I just realized listening is so important. And that's really what I'm going to try to do more in my life.
Oh, I think you're not the only person like that, Todd. A lot of people are in the same boat.
I think you're right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So after Charles, we did a beautiful sound healing ceremony. It was kind of a meditation led by a couple of people who used various musical instruments and bells and gongs and chimes and singing and humming, and just a beautiful, peaceful, connected space that was created there.
Yeah.
That was kind of what led into going back home and getting some sleep, and just had a beautiful sleep that night. And the next morning, Drew Dillinger and Deborah Johnson came up together, and Drew Dillinger read one of his poems.
I'm Drew Dillinger. I'm a poet, speaker, teacher, and writer, and I've been a friend and ally of the Pachamama Alliance for a long time. So this is a poem called, thank you, please. This is called We Make Music. We exist amidst the scattered shards of shattered stars. We exist amidst the scattered shards of shattered stars, and we make music. We rock on this rock. We flow on this globe. We go from Muddy to Buddy, from Janice to Alanis, from Charlie Parker to Ali Farker, from Artie Shaw to Mardi Gras, from Madonna to Rihanna, from Raga to Gaga, from Ode to Joy to Soldier Boy. The earth was once lava and now sings opera. Our home is a poem. The planet is a sonnet. We exist amidst the scattered shards of shattered stars, and we make music. Thank you.
And then Drew talked a little bit more about poetry and vision and our connection to the cosmos.
Cosmologist means the study of the universe as a whole, right? The study of the origin and development of the universe as in its entirety. That's a scientific, astronomical. We talk about physics and astronomy when we're talking about modern scientific cosmology. But in a broader, deeper, richer anthropological, comparative religions and mythology sense, Cosmology means the story that a culture tells itself about how the world came to be and how we fit into it. So every culture has a cosmology. Every culture has a fundamental, primal story of how the world came to be as it is, and how we as humans fit into it. So the first story I want to tell you about, it was about 27 years ago now. It was 1991. I was sitting in Assisi, Italy, with one of the leading environmental thinkers of our time. And he was talking about the power of story. And he said, it seems that we basically communicate meaning by narrative. At least that's my approach to things, that narrative is our basic mode of understanding. At the time, Thomas Berry was a 77-year-old sage, a Catholic priest, though he was never quite comfortable in that role as a Catholic priest. And he was discouraged from teaching by his order for many years. So you want to talk about this guy who's having these revelatory insights about the ecological situation, and his order is discouraging students from meeting with him. I've talked to people who were seminarians when Father Berry was around, and they used to have to make up excuses to go and meet with Thomas Berry because they were discouraged from meeting with Thomas Berry. So they'd say, well, I'm going to confession with Father. This one guy says, just a little aside, this one guy went to confession with Father Tom, who was just in his room, and it's like most of the room, these little, have you been in these Catholic monasteries? They ain't luxurious, right? And most of his room is taken up by his bed, right? And so this young man is kind of telling Thomas about some of his personal problems, and Tom says, oh, I know just what you need. And he gets up and he walks over his bed to reach a high bookshelf, and then he stops and he says, oh, you don't read Chinese. But that's the kind of thinker that Thomas Berry was. He read Pali, he read Sanskrit, he read Chinese, and he spent decades reflecting on the deep crisis in Western civilization, basically. And as the late 60s turned to the early 70s and the mid 70s, he began to reflect on what are the deep roots of the ecological crisis. Why is there such hostility, such antipathy toward the earth in the Western tradition? And he began to realize that it was because of of problematic cosmology, a fundamentally dysfunctional worldview. And that, there's lots of, I don't need to belabor, we all know, we all get the gist of it, and many people have been talking about it for 30 years, so I don't need to belabor these points, because I do want to get to social justice pretty quickly as well, but it's all connected, obviously. But, some of the roots of the worldview are what his one-word critique would be anthropocentrism. Yeah. That every major institution, the political, the economic, the religious, the educational, media, all of our major institutions are anthropocentric, and they've given and so they've perceived and perpetuated and been premised upon a fundamental existential gulf between the human world and the more than human realm, between the human and the natural world, between the human order and the cosmological order or the earth order. And we've given all the rights and all the value to the human and no rights and no value to the non-human realm. And we've objected, and so these roots go very deep. This is why I highly recommend that people read Thomas Berry, that they read The Dream of the Earth, and they read The Great Work, that they read The Sacred Universes. They're just 3 of his collections of essays. Because there's a lot of depth to what he's talking about, and it's hugely influential. Like now, enough time's gone by where it's like I feel like some people are forgetting about Berry, but this was hugely influential. When he died in 2009, he was widely regarded as one of the most influential, profound, even provocative environmental writers and thinkers of our time.
And then Reverend Deborah did a exercise with us. I mean, she's just such a powerful speaker. I mean, just listening to her, you just kind of just want to go out and start doing stuff,
Yeah.
You just want to go out and save the world and be a better person and just come from your heart. So Deborah Johnson talked about being pulled by vision.
Pain pushes until vision pulls. There's nothing wrong with having our pain as a motivator, But if you stay in the pain, it's immobilizing. If you stay in it, it robs you of all your energy. You have a vision. And it's the vision that's going to pull you over the top. If you start AA from the pain of your alcoholism, at some point you have to move beyond trying to not drink to living a sober life. It's like the vision of the sobriety is what's going to pull you over the top. So what I'm saying here is that we have to have a vision. We have to have a dream. That part of the reason why we're not getting as far as we need to get on social justice issues is not because of ultra-conservative people who are in the way. It's nice, progressive, liberal people who don't dream largely enough. It's nice, progressive, liberal people who are saying out of their mouths the same thing everybody else said. So if I were to take all of your first responses and throw them into a hat, I wouldn't know who were the social change, transformative, progressive people versus the ones who were fighting for the status quo. I wouldn't know the difference. Shift the vibration. Shift the frequency. Dare to stand somewhere. That's all I'm asking you to do. Just stand somewhere. You don't have to have all the answers to how everything is going to work out. You don't have to worry about all what everybody else is doing or what they're not doing. And I'm not saying there's not a place for activism. But what I'm saying, in a group like this, stand somewhere. Does this make sense? Yeah. Stand somewhere.
And I also got to sit down and have lunch with her, along with my friend Antonio, and just had a great conversation. And, she's everything. She's just like she's on stage. That's how she is her whole life. Just completely inspiring.
Fantastic. So I'm curious, Reverend Johnson or Reverend Deborah, which denominational church does she come from?
Her church, she's the founding minister and president of the Inner Light Ministries, an omni-faith outreach ministry. And so it's really open to all faiths and even non-faiths, atheists, whatever. Just as long as you have sort of a spiritual candle in your heart somewhere, go see Deborah Johnson, check out her videos online.
It's fascinating. Pachamama Alliance seems to attract all sorts of people. My wife was saying that there's a Catholic priest or something that's been involved, and church, even sisters of the Catholic Church have also been involved. So it's a widespread community full not just of people of faith or religion, but all walks of life.
Absolutely, yeah. And there's Catholics, Christians, atheists. It's really it's not religious in any way. It's but it is very spiritual. I mean, one of their missions is to bring forth a spiritually fulfilling human presence on the planet. And I still consider myself an atheist, and but I also consider myself very spiritual. I mean, I felt my own spirit. I felt connected to the earth. I felt connected to the cosmos. But I just don't think you have to believe in a particular type of God or figure in order to have those feelings and those experiences. But that's me preaching now. So, but really, Pachamama is definitely open to all faiths, all religions, all beliefs. Definitely. I mean, just only thing you really have to believe in is that there's hope for this planet, and the human beings are part of that hope.
Whereabouts are we now? That was Sunday or Monday?
Yeah, that was Sunday. Yeah. Yep. So, and then on Monday, we got to hear from Brian Swim,
Mm-hmm.
And Brian Swim is a cosmologist and a professor of cosmology at the California Institute of Integrative Studies, which is also a school where my beautiful partner, Rochelle, happened to attend.
Okay.
Had that connection going on with Brian.
Yeah.
And he spoke about how human beings are an expression of the cosmos. And I think I'll just let him speak for himself and show this clip.
Sounds great.
The Milky Way galaxy is a 12 billion year process. So the Milky Way galaxy is what gave birth to us. The creativity, the self-organizing dynamics. So we are understanding now that the galaxy itself is a form of intelligence. It's not a human intelligence. It's not even mammalian. It's galactic. So we are enveloped in a galactic intelligence that brought us forth. Our role is to enable the galactic intelligence to understand itself in human consciousness. Our role is to enable the intelligence of the galaxy to reflect upon its own intelligence, its own beauty, in the mode of conscious self-awareness. The universe knows what it's doing. The universe knows what it's doing. We have to become students of the universe and to figure out what it's doing so we can participate in a mutually enhancing way. Okay, let's say it took 100,000 years for us to develop our imaginations. Okay? How long is it going to take us to develop these other qualities? How long until we really fulfill our promise of a comprehensive compassion? The amazing thing about humans is that they can care so much about beings that have nothing to do with their sexual offspring or their food. I mean, we can become captivated by the beauty of people or of animals or of places. You just know it needs to be cherished. You just know it. So how long will it take? Maybe it'll take 100,000 years, right? So, okay. So the way to deal with these questions is to take the view of the creative universe. Break out of modern consciousness with its particular deadlines. We don't know what the deeper rhythms are. We can intuit them, we can participate, but we can't set deadlines. This is a good one to keep in mind when you get discouraged, because look, we're at the cutting edge of a powerful transformation of consciousness. And we have to realize that our commitment is for our entire lives, and it may take 100,000 years. Okay, it takes that long. But here's what I want you to remember. The average mammalian species, we've calculated this, you estimate how many, all these different species. The average mammalian species lasts 2.7 million years. Let's say we're above average. Let's give us a tenure of 2.8 million. In other words, we've been around for 200,000 years. We've got 2.7 million years left. Think of what we can do. That's the time frame. You see, you got to break out of modern consciousness into this larger consciousness, which goes with different names, but one of them can be called cosmic consciousness. Thank you. Thank you so much.
That's Brian Swim, and you can tell from his striking appearance and his passion, this guy is just totally on fire with what he's talking about, and we were just all pretty psyched to have him there. His video was a little bit shorter than his whole talk, but his whole talk was, I don't know, maybe 15, 20 minutes. So he said what he had to say and got us all jacked up about being a part of the cosmos, and then he was gone back to the cosmos. Yeah, that's about wraps it up. And then just wanted to mention the participants there too were just phenomenal people. I mean, it's like each, I felt like each one of the people in the gathering could have also been guest speakers. There's just such a group of luminaries and dedicated environmentalists, social activists, spiritual people. You know, these aren't just people sitting on a hill somewhere in a cave, you know, chanting. They're out there in the world getting stuff done and making stuff happen. And it's just really heartening to see that many people gathered. There's 135 total people that are completely dedicating their lives to making this world a better place. And
yeah, so Todd, if people want to become a part of the Pachamama Alliance, what's the best way to get involved?
You take the Awakening the Dreamer Symposium, and that's available in certain communities, in person, live events. Generally last 3 to 4 hours. But there's also an online version, and I'll put a link in here, of Awakening the Dreamer. And that's a 2-hour self-paced. You can do it 10 minutes at a time, or just fit it in as you have coffee breaks or whatnot at your own pace. And that really gives it a great explanation with videos and guest speakers also of how we got to the world situation being where it is, the history of it, this underlying assumptions and underlying psychology that led to us being where we're at. And then what's happening right now in terms of furthering global warming or climate change or social injustice, or maybe reversing some of those issues. And also there's the Drawdown now, Project Drawdown, which are really in its infant stages, that will give people, like always after people, especially after you take Awakening the Dreamer, people often say, well, okay, what do I do? I understand the problem. What do I do? I'm just one person. And Project Drawdown really gives you a way to not only make a difference, but feel like you're making a difference. And that's super important in creating any kind of movement or being a part of any kind of movement. People tend to jump right into, how do I change the whole system? Okay, I get the problem. Now, how do I vote my president into office? Or how do I change government policy? Or how do I post on Facebook and get everybody to see all these issues? I mean, that can be done, but it's way more effective to start with first yourself. Like you said, change your own habits, your own self, but then talk to your family, talk to your friends, and get out there in your community.
Maybe even talk to your boss and see if your company will come on board and with some of the ideas and implement them.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
Anyway, thanks for chatting to us today, Todd. That was the Pachamama Alliance is amazing. So if you want to get involved, like we said, get in contact with Todd, and he can help you out, and also have a look at some of those links that he'll put on the website.
All right, mate. Well, thanks everyone for listening to Fine Food and Healthy Living Asia, and we will see you next time.
If you're enjoying the Fine Food and Healthy Living Asia podcast, please consider supporting us by going to our homepage at www.finefoodandhealthylivingasia.com and making a donation.
We are beginning a new way to support the show by subscribing as a loyal member. Another option on our homepage at finefoodandhealthylivingasia.com. There are options to choose for the level of support you wish to give.
We will always make our podcasts available for free and appreciate your patronage to be able to do so.
If you subscribe with iTunes, please remember to give us a 5-star rating. If you have not yet subscribed, please do so and then give us a 5-star rating. For other subscribers on Google Play, Spotify, or any other aggregators, please rate us there. Once again, thank you for listening to the show.